When death speaks, you pay attention. Let's talk about Final Destination Bloodlines.
Hello everyone, welcome back. We are back now in the Still Podcast. So today we are going to be discussing or debating Final Destination Bloodlines. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is. Movie recommendation time. So guys, who wants to share the most recent thing that they've seen?
I'm gonna go with Andor/Rogue One. I think we talked about Andor a few episodes back, and I'm not really kind of like jamming with the first couple of episodes, but from episode 6 to the very end, it just heats up on another level. And the arc 3 that they go through from 6 to 9 is just near perfect, and it just has you emotionally gripped throughout the entire episodes. And I remember I was kind of sort of half paying attention to Andor when I was first watching season 2, but in those episodes I was fully locked in. Like I was so engrossed in it, and then just the way it ends, it's perfect, and it just reminded me how much I enjoyed Rogue One. And then when you rewatch Rogue One, having watched Andor, you then just have a different level of appreciation for the movie itself, the characters in it, and the journeys that they've been on, because it's been enriched by the story that they've laid before, and it just kind of goes hand in hand. And literally, these, like Andor and Rogue One, are by far the best two things that have come out of Disney Star Wars, for sure. And for me personally, I could say maybe Star Wars itself. I know that might be a little bit controversial for people that love the original trilogy, but I don't think I've enjoyed Star Wars as much, and it just hits me in the right way, because it's more real, it's more gritty, and it's more human, and it's very morally grey in what it's trying to do. And there's sort of good guys that are having to utilize bad guys' tactics to try and do good in the universe, and then you've got people that maybe don't realize that they're on the wrong side of things. And it's just so, quite fascinating how everything unfolds. So yeah, Andor/Rogue One, if you haven't watched it, please go watch it. Even if you don't like Star Wars, it will just literally make you a fan, I would say.
Yeah, I'm still stuck on episode 3. Like, Andor season 1 was one of my favorite things in modern Star Wars. I think there's one or two other things that are still worth watching. For one, I think there's half a good movie in the Solo movie, for example, but that's another story. But I just bounced off so hard of the first 3 episodes of Andor season 2, and I'm like, everybody has been saying that it really gets good in the second half, and so I'm definitely going to push forward and hope it pans out for me. But yeah, I've been looking forward to this for like 2 years, and like the disappointment of the first 3 episodes was just so harsh that I just walked away for like 2 weeks. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna catch up on that.
Looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, me too.
Is it a good mixture between like action and drama, or
It's basically about the beginning of the rebellion. And so in season 1, it's about like kind of the very beginnings, and now the rebellion is coming together, and we're kind of seeing the Empire at the height of their power. And there's some action. The first season had like 3 or 4 really big set pieces that were really impressive. But
it's more like Dune 1 rather than Dune 2?
I'm not sure about that comparison.
When I say, I mean in terms of like, because Dune 1 was more like in-house political beef going on, whereas Dune 2 was more the aftermath and more action, if that makes sense. So that's what I mean. Is Andor like more swaying towards like in-house political beef, or is it Dune 2 where it's just like, because you said there was some action, if that makes sense, or they're a mixture of both?
I think Hervé can better answer that, right? Because I haven't seen it yet.
Overall, I think it's a mixture of both, and sort of what Daniel said was correct in terms of there's a lot of character moments in there. There's a lot of sort of talking. I know people don't always like a lot of talking in stuff, but it's not talking for the sake of talking. They're really building these characters, really fleshing out this world and its ideas and views and stuff like that get you emotionally gripped. And then when it does get to the action, it really pays off the action. Like it makes the build up to the action very much worth it, because you've gone on the journey with the characters to get to that particular moment. So in season 1 there was a heist that they do, and then they're building up to it. And once they get to the heist, it's great action from there. And then in this, there's several action moments across some of the different acts in the series, and for sure, episode 8 was very emotionally gripping. everything that kind of went down with that. So I think it does both really well, and it doesn't rely on the action to be good, but the action is supplemented by all the character work that they do beforehand.
I watched a Netflix movie called Counter-Strike. Pretty much an elite military team end up getting ambushed by, I don't know if I think they're the cartel, but yeah, they end up getting ambushed by the cartel. It ends up turning into like a hostage rescue mission, but that was kind of like accidental because it starts off with the head marshal. I don't know what term that you're giving, what's given to like the head, but let me just say marshal. He kind of saved these two girls from the cartel. I don't want to say cartel in case people get offended, but I think they're the cartel. That kind of leads to them kind of like exposing, is it a conspiracy? Yeah, because there are obviously people within the cartel that's working with, people within the government. So it kind of does expose like a conspiracy, but that's not really the main theme or the main point of the main plot of the film. But yeah, it's pretty much an action-packed, film. Yeah, that's about it on Netflix. That was a good watch. So I'd recommend you guys go watch that.
So I've been making an effort to watch some older classical movies that I've not seen before. And this week I watched Casablanca, which is a 1942 romantic drama film. Obviously, I'd had heard of Casablanca before and I knew some of the quotes and some of the images, but I'd never actually seen it because in my head, it's a romance from 1942. How interesting can it be? But then I sat down and watched it as a chore almost. But very quickly, I realized that it's not quite what I'd heard it was. So it is a romance, definitely, but essentially it's set in World War II Casablanca, which is French-occupied Morocco. People from all over Europe are essentially fleeing the war in Casablanca because that is kind of the stepping stone to America. And that it's like this borderline propaganda angle of America is kind of the promised land and everybody wants to go there, and once you're there, everything is great. That's kind of part of it. And then there's the romance where two people who got separated fleeing occupied France are reunited in Casablanca and then have a choice to make about what they want to do now that they have found each other again, not thinking that they would ever see each other again. And then also there's all sorts of other characters that come from all over Europe. So you have like the French exile government that is holding on to its colonies while France proper is occupied. You have the Germans who are kind of throwing their weight around and the French can't really push back very much. You have like Americans who are kind of stranded there and have reasons for why they can't go back to America. There's people from Eastern Europe who have escaped persecution and purges and the camps and are trying to get to safety. And it's like all of these people are coming together in one location. And they all have their reasons for where they are what they're fleeing from and what they're fleeing towards. And they all kind of converge in this very precarious and very dangerous Casablanca, which is kind of a free port, but it's not exactly a safe place. It's really like a microcosm of a lot of like European geopolitics in World War II, where different characters kind of represent kind of the fates of different countries and different aspects of that conflict. And there's a lot going on. And even if you're not really there for the romance, which I wasn't really, there's still a lot to like about that movie. If you just like complex political situations and characters who kind of navigate complicated, messy political setup, and each one has their own journey and their own reason for doing things, and they are at odds with each other and so on. Like Casablanca is actually pretty good about that.
Well, looks like it's time for the main event. Danny G, please give the people a synopsis of Final Destination Bloodlines.
So Final Destination Bloodlines is the 6th movie in the Final Destination franchise. It basically follows the story of a family that is descended from somebody who cheated death 60 years earlier. And death is now catching up with them. In the tradition of the Final Destination franchise, they are one by one being killed by very elaborate, overcomplicated accidents, where fate kind of conspires against them in increasingly elaborate and creative ways. The family then bands together to try and figure out how this works and how they can break that curse. The story then unfolds from there. So what did we think of Final Destination Bloodlines?
So when I saw the trailer, I wasn't really looking forward to it. There wasn't really anything that stood out. However, after watching the movie, I can now say, I think, the aspect of Bloodlines adds a meaningful layer to the story and to the franchise. And this is kind of weird for me to say. I think this film showed how spiteful death can be, especially when it doesn't get what it wants. So I've started to watch the whole franchise all over again. So last week I just watched Final Destination 1. So I'm gonna go back, to watching 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So I want to see exactly how kind of like death evolves. I don't think this idea has ever been done, right? I think this is the first time Bloodlines, like the whole, the theme of Bloodlines is new to the franchise, I'm assuming.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something which stood out, and that's something which I definitely enjoyed because it showed how, like I said, spiteful death can be, which is pretty ironic in a way. So I definitely enjoyed this one. It was a fun film. I think it was mainly nostalgia. It was nostalgia as well. It was a mixture of nostalgia and it's just a mixture of a good idea. Even though it was delivered in the same way as other films, it was just delivered from a new perspective.
Yeah, I can agree, actually. This was a very good time at the movies. I really enjoyed this movie. I think I was far enough removed from watching any Final Destination that the whole slow build-up to each character's death and not knowing how they were going to die and, the different teases and, misdirects that they had as to, what might cause the death was, really good. And it had me, especially that opening scene when they're at the Sky Tower and they're going through, all these different hazards. You can kind of see that this Sky Tower is kind of being cobbled together and you get into some bits and pieces of information such as, the project was finished 5 months early. So you just know that disaster is around the corner, but you don't know where it's going to come at what point in the movie. I feel like that whole, premonition scene was chef's kiss. It was great. It had some good laughs as well in here. Funny enough, actually, again, I'm not a person that often laughs out loud, but there were moments where I was actually chuckling in the cinema, and people around were laughing as well. So it was just naturally funny, and it didn't have to force the humor as some movies do in terms of saying obvious things to get laughs. I think it was just just good funny moments in this movie. It had good enough characters as well. If I think about the story, too deeply, probably not the greatest. I mean, I did like the whole aspect of the bloodlines and death, taking its time to clear out the people that should have died, as well as the offspring that came from there. I feel like that was a nice twist to add to the franchise as well. Downside would be the final act. I feel like all of those deaths started to feel a bit rushed, and the whole climax of the movie was a bit anticlimactic for me, and it just didn't quite come together at the end as well as I would have hoped for. But the rest of the movie, I was having a great time, man. I was having so much fun with each death that was happening. I was just so enthralled and just having a great cinema experience. So very good movie.
Yeah, I think we're broadly in agreement. I think this is just how you do a franchise movie. It follows the rules of its predecessor, it builds on it, it stylistically fits while taking the story to new places, right? So the idea of the descendants of people who should have died also being marked for death, that is also something that's, I think, new to the story. On top of that, it kind of had this weird retro feel where it felt like a movie from 2008. Just the way the dialogue was written, how it was acted, how it was shot. It felt like a movie that kind of kept in the world for 15 years and just released. Just the feel of it is just very weird. And in a time where everything is kind of just digital and very sterile and very not lifelike, this movie just felt like out of a different time for some reason. I think the characters were okay and the plot was kind of serviceable, but it was just designed to enable a couple of creative kills that all delivered. There wasn't really a bad sequence in this. It set up some good character moments, especially the estranged parts of the family in a time where the family all has to come together, but some of them have not been on speaking terms for many years. And there was each of the characters, they were not regular cardboard cutouts that you get in a lot of classical horror movies or slasher movies, which this kind of is. But the characters who all had a personality and a purpose, and it just all fit together, I thought. This movie also does dread like nothing else. The movie is really likes to troll its audience by having stuff in the background that in the context of a Final Destination movie is just too menacing. You see the danger everywhere. A lot of the time nothing happens, but this idea that you're waiting for the next big accident to happen and you don't know where it's going to come from, and then suddenly it happens and it just starts escalating. I just kept feeling this kind of dread about trying to anticipate where the next accident came from. And the movie I thought the movie was deliberately set up to invoke that, and it had a lot of fun with that. And I could feel that the writers were trying to come up with ways to make us uneasy. So yeah, just this fires on all cylinders. This was a good time at the movie. There was nothing about this where I said, I do have some story issues. But just as an experience, it delivered what it advertised, and I walked away happy.
I was gonna say the great, like you mentioned about Dread. Like the biggest compliment I can give this movie is on my drive home. I was so paranoid about everything, and I was like, "Let me just make it inside the house." Pretty much, like it's so weird, and like I drive all the time, everywhere, and whatever, and it's like normally fine. But even just like merging back on like an A road, I was doing it so carefully because I was like, something could go wrong. And again, it hasn't happened since. Like obviously, just coming out of the theater, but that speaks testament to the effect that the movie had on me.
Yeah, for me, that lasted about 20 minutes. I wasn't driving, but like on my way home from the cinema, I was kind of in that mindset, right? Because it kind of messes with how you think for at least a little while, even though like it makes no sense, but it's still kind of a fun experience when a movie sticks with you like that, right? And honestly, this is what it's like to watch a horror movie at age 12.
Yeah.
Right? Like I remember I have memories of watching horror movies or disaster movies or something like that, like at a young age, and it just sticks with you, and you walk home from your friend's house and you think there's like a ghost behind the corner or something, right? Like because it like the movie has had this impact on your mind, and it sticks with you for a while, and it will change how you perceive things, and it will change how you think. As you get older, you just don't get this anymore. It's not like I believed this was real, right? Like it's not like that, but it's like it has like a lingering impact on you, and it's been a long time since I've had this from a movie, and I think that just shows how effective it is at inducing this kind of mindset.
I think as well is it's what you always say about horror movies is that it has to induce a real fear that you have. And again, whilst a lot of these deaths are quite outlandish, you could also kind of see how some of it could potentially happen. And maybe not to a point where you do die in the way that you die in this movie, but what happens if someone accidentally breaks some glass next to ice and it goes into your drink?
Yeah.
That was like one of the most stressful parts of the movie, was not knowing who had the ice in their glass and sort of whether someone was gonna drink it or not. And there was like really a couple of good fake outs, but it was just like stuff like that in the movie that was like, that could be so real, and that could sort of really happen in real life, which I think it done well.
I even think they made that feeling even worse, because even though we are used to that feeling from this franchise, they expanded it by making it a bloodline thing. And even in society, like now, like especially within the African culture, generational curses is a big thing. Especially even in the Bible, they incorporated that theme in this, and even with the theme of inheritance in a way that, that's why I said death was spiteful in this, because okay, I couldn't get you and you're trying to fight me, so cool, now I'm going to bun your whole family, I'm going to curse your whole family just because you're trying to fight me. Do you know what I'm saying? So they kind of like made paranoia go from 50 to 100, especially for a lot of Africans, because therefore what the Africans are going to watch is, because it's like generational curse is a big thing, is a very big thing, and they did it very well in this film. That's what's going to lead to my question as well. Like, with the kind of like Bloodlines concept, would you say it was like a fresh perspective that they introduced that kind of like expanded the mythology of Final Destination, or was it irrelevant?
So I think it's an interesting idea, and it's certainly an escalation, but I'm not sure it really changes how the movie works, right? Because typically the way a Final Destination movie works is that a bunch of people are in an accident, they narrowly survive it, usually because somebody has a premonition, and then death kind of tries to catch up with them. You still end up with a group of people who are marked for death, and they're kind of trying to outrun it, right? So the basic dynamic of it seems to be mostly intact. The only difference was the brother, where the guy who finds out, is it Eric, who finds out that he is not biologically related to the people he thought were his family. That created an interesting dynamic where he could have walked away from it, and he got really close, and he's kind of the loner, he's kind of the metalhead, he's kind of a little bit of a misfit, a little bit, like he does not really get along with most people, but whenever he shows some compassion towards other people, it has more of an impact, right? Because it's not his go-to, and it doesn't come very natural to him. By making it about being a direct descendant of somebody who should have died, that gives him a get out of jail free card, and he could have walked away and didn't. And that, I think that was the kind of the point where, like, the characters are okay. Like, nobody really offended me, nobody annoyed me, but nobody really impressed me either. Stephanie specifically being the main character, kind of bland, not much interesting to her. But Eric was interesting because he didn't have to stay.
No, I agree. The moment that you see him after the shop should have burnt down or whatever, I think I was taken by surprise. I was a bit like, oh, but I should have guessed it because normally they show the person dying in like the most gruesome way possible. So the fact that they didn't show that, probably should have expected it, but it still kind of took me by surprise. And I was like, oh, okay, what's going on in this situation? And then the moment where it's revealed and you can kind of see the build up to it when the mum's crying, you're like, oh, that's what's happening. And for, I don't know whether I was just in a viewing with a bunch of sick people that found it that find that type of stuff funny, but everyone was like laughing.
Oh, I was
at that, like,
smiling for much of the movie.
Yeah, yeah, but everyone was laughing at the fact that he was adopted, or he like his mum had an affair, and I was like, it's a bit sick. Okay, cool. I mean, I laughed as well, so maybe I have a sickness as well. But yeah, that whole sort of build up to that was great, and I actually felt like he was the best character in this, just because, again, like you said, is that he could have walked away. He was sort of kind of the loner, but he still showed that he still felt the connection to the family, and like, even though he felt like distant, even though he sort of was kind of like an odd one out, it still highlighted the importance of family to him, and sort of the comfort of family, and the comfort of having his brother around, that he was sort of willing to go the extra mile to try and save his brother, even though it kind of didn't work out for both of them.
There was even a moment where he was actually like doubtful. And when they were entering the mum's, or was it like trailer van or whatever? And then there was a moment where he was just like, because when he did that, I thought to myself, oh, I didn't understand. Well, I did understand, but I was in two minds. I was like, is he reacting in that way? Because he paused for a moment and he said, "Wait, I'll come with you." I think that's a moment. There was more to it.
So the deal is that he is kind of a loner. He doesn't have any kind of warm relationship with any of them. But when it really counts, he's there to have their back, right? Like, is it Bobby who has the peanut allergy?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So he looks out for him on several instances, right? He does it like in a too cool for school kind of attitude, but he does care, right? And he does look out for people he cares about. And then the whole thing about, okay, fine, I'm going too, that was just because his conscience was nagging him to do the right thing, even though he didn't want to. And even though he wasn't entirely comfortable doing it or showing that kind of vulnerability, but then he did it anyway.
But I also think there was more to it than just raw vulnerability. I think it's because there's fear of actually going against death. And I think he actually might have thought that, oh crap, if I intervene, something could happen to me as well. So that's what I was trying to say, sorry. So there was more to it than him just kind of like wanting to, being reluctant to protect his brother, or wanting to protect his brother at the same time. It was like, okay, I can still kind of like die trying to intervene. And that's exactly what happened, which kind of leads into my next question as well. How do you guys feel about the actual antagonist? Because usually with antagonists, it's physical. And I think this is like this was the selling point of the whole franchise, is death is the enemy. Death is the villain. How do you guys still feel about death being the antagonist?
I do like it. It's just the fact of how you have to beat it is where I wasn't quite sort of rocking with it. Especially, and that's why I feel like I had a bit of an issue with the final act of the movie, because the whole idea of you either have to like die and come back, or you have to sort of kill someone else to cheat death, or to kind of like pass it on or whatever. It just didn't work as well in this movie, and I can't remember the other movies and how it's played out to sort of know if it worked in those movies or not. But for me, it just didn't vibe well. And I get it's like something for the characters to work towards, and something for the characters to try and sort of overcome by, one, they were trying to sort of track down the person that had a little bit more information on sort of how things played out. But then two, with the brother and him trying to like kill his brother and sort of whatever. I don't know. I felt like that's when the movie was starting to kind of be dragged down. But like, as death being a threat, of course you want the antagonist to be a situation where you don't know how the hero's going to beat it. You don't know how the heroes are going to sort of overcome the threat that they're facing. But you still want that solution. You still want that resolution, to know that they had a chance and that they had some way of beating it, and it just felt too impossible for them to handle. And it was quite stupid as well, the way that the brother thought that they beat it, because his sister died by drowning, and it's like, how do you know? You're not a medical expert. How do you know that she was dead for a certain amount of time and then you brought her back to life? Like, that's not how it works pretty much not how drowning works. And you didn't have it confirmed. You kind of just assumed, and it just didn't quite make sense to me, that part of it. And obviously, the rest of the movie played out how it did.
It's also a little bit rushed, as in they have this whole sequence at the fortress, right? And there's this whole thing about drowning and the explosion and the resuscitation, and then you think it's over, and then what is it, the girlfriend's father, who is a doctor, just says, no, but you didn't die, like you couldn't have died. And then an accident happens and they get impaled by tree logs, and then movie's over. Like, there's a character moment missing here, I think. It's a totally understandable mistake to make, and I can't quite put my finger on what exactly is wrong with it or what it should have been, but it somehow feels unsatisfying. It somehow feels incomplete. And I think it's largely because there's no decision to be made. Like it's not like they make a bad decision, and as a result of that, they think they are out of the woods, and then the curse catches up with them again. It just feels a little bit like a gotcha. And that is kind of a little bit unsatisfying.
You summed up how I was feeling better, because I couldn't quite put my finger on why it was so dissatisfying, the end of the movie, because it didn't feel earned, and it didn't feel like we'd had a character moment that had led to a point where we'd have a resolution that could be satisfying.
I did like that it ended on a death. I think happy endings are way overdone. I think more movies should have unhappy endings or end in failures, if that's an interesting story and if that takes a character to an interesting place. And it would make movies as a whole less predictable. And so that this doesn't end on a happy end where they just die by, like, I think like a train derails and it's carrying tree logs that kind of just impales them or splatters them on the road. I was smiling as the credits were rolling, because I liked that the movie was doing something a little bit outside the box, even though it wasn't like a satisfying conclusion to a story.
Do you feel like the grandma should have served more of a purpose?
I think she served exactly the purpose that she needed to. Like, I really like this idea of somebody who has been running for 60 years and is now running out of time, especially when she willingly sacrifices herself because she knows that is the only thing that will convince Stephanie, right? So Stephanie goes to her grandmother's fortress, walks away thinking she's crazy. Iris knows from her premonitions that she will be impaled by this weather vane kind of thing. She knows that she is safe as long as she stays inside the building, but she steps out deliberately, knowing that it will kill her and how it will kill her. And that is the evidence that Stephanie needs to save the rest of her family, or at least try. And I think that was really cool. You don't know a lot about this character. I don't know if she's been in the other movies. I don't think so. But so we know very little about her. But we kind of, both from the opening sequence and from the older version of her that we see, I think we get a complete picture of this character, and we know what she's about, and we know what she wants, and we know why she makes that decision. We don't need a big speech, although we kind of get one, but we don't need it explicitly spelled out. It's just a look where she realizes Stephanie was the only hope, because she is kind of following in her footsteps, but she's walking away, and she has like a very narrow window to prove it to her, and the only way she can do that is by offering herself up to death. That's a really cool character moment.
In terms of like the pacing issue, I think another idea, which would have been cool as well, is if her death could have broke the generational curse. But obviously that's later on discovered, so she could have had more of an involvement in the story of pretty much the storyline of her families and what they're going through. So I think, for me, that would have kind of like been another alternate idea, which could have added a bit more depth and a bit more time to the story, because it did feel like a lot of events were happening were quick. But I do hear what you're saying, Daniel. It was her. She did definitely serve a purpose, and even though that purpose was brutal, it was definitely it was its final destination. So it was fun to watch, as sick as that sounds. But I do think another idea, because that is kind of like another idea which people do use when it comes to kind of like the whole mythology around generational curses and how they can be broken. And I think that could have been something as well that could have been an idea that could have been looked upon.
First of all, the fact that it was brutal and visceral is what made it fun, and like we know what kind of movie we're watching, and that's the kind of thing we're here for. That's not a negative in my view, but also there's like another version of the script where Iris kind of comes out of hiding and reunites with her family and kind of mentors the rest of her family, kind of does what Stephanie does for much of the second half of the movie. That would have been so much lamer. Like, that would have not been as interesting. And for Iris to sacrifice herself like this. And, you know, she's lived her entire life selflessly, right? Because she did not have a good life because of this, right? And that is why she does this. And that is why she's ready to make this sacrifice. And I think that makes it much more interesting.
Could you say, because I know you say that you wanted her to break the generation curse, but could you say that she actually kickstarted it in two ways? So firstly, Death couldn't get the rest of the family members until she died because Death had to go in order. So the fact that she died then set in motion for the rest of the family to be killed. But then also in the sense of the relationship that she had with her son and her daughter. And you can see the two different effects it had on her children. So I can't remember what the mother's name is, but in her sense, she saw herself becoming her mother and was worried and was scared of passing that to her children and scared of messing up her children the same way that her mother did her. So she chose to step away and go into isolation, which then creates a different kind of pain, but not the same pain that, you know, the grandma passed on to her. And then on the father side of things, he tried to just ignore it and kind of like hide away from the problem and not try to embrace it. And maybe you can kind of say that he didn't. I don't know if there was like an obvious way that his life was kind of like screwed over by his mother, but he was very very avoidant and very deflective of dealing with the problem. And then that could potentially, you know, speak to how his relationship was with his kids, where you've got, you know, an older son, that isn't actually his because he was going through problems with his wife, and that could potentially be related to, you know, being deflective, being avoidant of the real issue and whatever. And she ended up having another kid on him. The whole dynamic between, you know, his other kids who are quite distant from each other, and you can kind of get the sense that they do appreciate the family unit, but you can kind of feel that they're not as close. They're not a tight-knit family and whatever, and they're not, you know, a family that you'd imagine kind of speaks about their emotion and speaks about, you know, their feelings and stuff like that. So again, that might be a bit of a reach, but that's just how I see the whole kickstart and generational trauma and how it's passed down and how it evolves and how it changes depending on who it's passed down to, and then how that then progresses further.
Forcing the family's hand and convincing Stephanie is kind of what happens. Like, that's the dual purpose of her sacrifice, right? And
yeah.
Like, if she had just gone with Stephanie and just talked to the rest of the family, she would have just been the crazy old lady, right? Yeah. She would have been crazy grandmother.
But
that's this was the only way she could have actually accomplished her goal of saving her family.
But that's kind of the angle I was going from. So it wasn't going to be her kind of like teaching the family how to fight death and they're all being on board with it. No. I was thinking to myself, it was going to kind of be like the same format. The same way the story was presented with Stephanie, it was kind of would still be resentful to her the way that they were resentful to Stephanie. And it was just kind of like, it'll follow the same storyline.
Speaking of Iris, I think the opening sequence is wonderful, right? Where Iris with her boyfriend goes to this guy, what's it called?
Skytree?
Something like that. She goes to this restaurant. This entire sequence where it sets up all the things that are going to go wrong, and then there's this one big explosion of everything going wrong all at once, like the glass dance floor cracks, and there's like open flames and whatever else there was, right? I think that entire sequence is really cool, and I think it's a good move to start off a movie like this with like the first big accident, like immediately. It kind of solves this problem of the boring first half hour, where we don't have to wait for half an hour to get to the good parts. We get what we came for immediately, and then we build up to the next one. So I think like pacing wise, that really worked out well. Yeah. Aside from being just really good.
Yeah, and I think that's the standout thing when it comes to the whole franchise, because that's how all the other movies are. So I do agree that just kind of grips you from the get-go.
My follow-up question is it cheap to make it a premonition? Because all of that didn't happen.
It's the whole premise of this movie. It's how things are set in motion, and it's showing what potentially could be. So I wouldn't see it as cheap in this movie, because that's the whole idea. Whereas if it was like in a different movie where it wasn't the rules of the universe, it wasn't the rules of the world, and it wasn't something that we'd seen before, and it was just kind of done as a convenience thing, then maybe you can see it as cheap, but not in this type of movie. I wouldn't say it has to be there for it to feel like that particular franchise. Why would you feel it's cheap in this particular movie? Or have you not seen the previous movies to kind of see that they've played this in pretty much all the movies?
I have seen them, but it's been a few years. But like typically dream sequences, which is what this is, they tend to undermine the stakes, and they tend to undermine the actual tension and the actual drama. because it didn't actually happen. We go through about half the movie before it is revealed that it was a premonition. Right, that Iris did not in fact die the way we saw in the opening sequence.
Okay, now I think it's because you maybe haven't seen the movies in a while, or maybe haven't remembered it, but that's pretty much standard in terms of, you know, these movies. That at the start is that you see the sequence of events of like how everyone is supposed to die, and then the whole purpose of it is that the person that had a premonition has cheated death from all of these deaths that were meant to happen. And then the movie happens after that, which death follows, you know, these people that were meant to die, pretty much. So, again, that's why I say in this movie, it wouldn't be cheap. Because I know how Final Destination work, I kind of knew immediately that she was having a premonition and that the deaths that were about to happen weren't going to actually happen.
For me, it had been several years, so I did not have that fresh in my memory, so I ended up believing that she died in that accident. But okay, if that's the convention. It's still interesting why it doesn't feel like a cop-out. Right? I understand that every movie does it, but you know, if every movie makes the same mistake, that's a different story. But somehow it works in this one.
It's a vehicle for how the story gets going. Basically, is why it doesn't feel like a cop out, as opposed to something like, what's that movie that we watched, Smile 2, where there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in the movie. You don't know what's a dream. You don't know what is a dream, what isn't a dream, and that it can feel a little bit cheap. Where, you know, you kind of manufactured the character to get to a certain point, whereas this is just almost like the start of any movie where disaster happens, or, you know, disaster was meant to happen. How does the story unfold from there?
Yeah, that makes sense. While we're on Iris, like, one thing I'm pretty certain makes no sense is her entire fortress. Yes, because she's built this environment specifically to ward off death, right? Because it's supposed to be a place where death cannot get to her, and she cannot have these kinds of accidents. First of all, to get to that place, you have to walk past giant wooden spikes. And outside, there's all sorts of things that can kill her. And in fact, like, the weather vane is one of those. Like, if she knows she's supposed to die by the weather vane impaling her, why did she not remove it? Or pay somebody to have removed it? For example, right? Or inside the house, it's just a house. I don't understand what's so special about the inside of the house. Shouldn't it be like an empty room where there's nothing there that could get to her? Or shouldn't it be like a big empty meadow where there's nothing within 100 meters? Shouldn't she be removing opportunities for death to kill her? Like as I was watching it, and as I saw the design of the fortress and where Iris was hiding out and where apparently she had been cheating death for decades, I did not understand why that worked in that place. Like, the place does not seem to be designed to prevent accidents.
It doesn't explain why you'd have wooden spikes outside, and then it doesn't explain, because she's in the middle of nowhere. So how do you get your supplies in? Like,
but that scares off people that come towards the house.
Yeah, but it's not about people. Like, she's not defending against any threat. She has to prevent accidents, and I did not see anything. So you guys have not seen Novocaine, right?
Yeah, I've seen it. Okay, but
so in Novocaine, the guy kind of has this condition where he cannot feel pain, and as a result, if he gets injured, he doesn't feel it, and so any minor injury might actually be deadly. And there's an opening sequence where for the first 15 minutes we see his apartment, and the entire thing is made like childproof. There's no sharp corners, the food he eats, and like everything is designed to make accidental injuries impossible. And he's kind of built his entire life around that, because he's got this condition that most people don't live past 20, and he's made it to like 35. And he does it because he's lived his entire life trying to anticipate injuries and preventing them. So it's just an example, right? It doesn't have to be this specifically, but like, I did not see how Iris was preventing accidents.
One step further, in the franchise itself, in one of the previous ones, there's a character called Claire Rivers, who is also trying to hide away from death. And what she does is she gets herself admitted to a mental hospital with a straitjacket. And you know, like the white padded rooms that they have in your own universe and in previous movies, you've kind of set up how like a character would logically go about avoiding getting something killed by accident, by anything. Like you said, it doesn't make sense. What it almost was setting up was that because everything was like kind of like shuttered out, is that it was like having like some way of like access to the outside world, or to like just like the outside, like, you know, when you had the sun sort of kind of like beaming on the magnifying glass to almost like, you know, knock the pot down or whatever, was how death was getting in. But that isn't really consistent with everything everywhere else. I don't know, or it's not really explained why needing to be outside for her specifically is how death can get her, and how sort of being inside the house prevents death from getting inside. Because we've seen plenty of people in, not just this movie, but in previous Final Destination movies, be killed inside their houses pretty much. And yeah, I guess you can say that they had windows and stuff like that. But I feel like if you're going to do something like that, it needs to be crystal clear, or it needs to be at least you have to try to explain why death can't get in.
Yeah, it's just like we spent so much time there, and it's made such a big point about how Iris has been ahead, or like 2 steps ahead of death the entire time, and I just didn't see why. Like she just seems to be really smart and perceptive. And that seems to be it. And then it was a little bit of a missed opportunity where you could have had a really cool environment where for decades she's been fortifying her environment against accidents. But anyway, like not a huge deal, just a little bit of a missed opportunity.
I think Iris had the same thing that, was it Stephanie? I think them two had the same thing where they can kind of like see the potential risks. I think there was a scene where obviously Stephanie saw obviously her cousin dying with, she said, the tree, the ball, and the bin or something like that. So I think that's similar to what Iris had. So then that's when obviously Iris used that to create the whole booklet of, pretty much the instruction manuals against the counterattacks against death, and the potential hazards. So yeah, I think that's she used that and obviously created a house that was pretty much death proof.
Yeah. Moving on, I think the thing that really makes this work is this idea that, like, there's this idea that stories make promises, right? Like, whenever you watch a movie, you read a book, you play a game, the marketing made a promise to you what kind of experience this will be. And it's the movie's job to fulfill that promise, right? And to give you what you signed up for and what it promised. And if it's going to subvert it in some way, then it still needs to appeal in some way to what it was you wanted out of this, and it needs to be better than what you expected and so on. But broadly, stories need to promise something and then deliver on it, right? And I think the thing that really struck out at me is how much this movie does that. It's just straight up a Final Destination movie. There's no big twist. There's no subversion. Like, it's just giving you the experience that it sold you. And that was kind of interesting, like, especially like it's been, 15 years since the last one? I think the last one was 2011. And it's basically, it just slots right into the franchise, and like it builds on it, right? Because there's elements in here that have not been in the older ones, but it's very much true to what came before, right? Without being straitjacketed by it. Like you sign up for a very specific experience, which is these elaborate accidents. And the movie just gives you like 4 of them, or 5. And I thought that was really interesting because, like, for years now, there's been this trend in movies to not give you what you want, right? To almost have contempt for what the audience wants. And here it just does it. And then also does more.
I think it definitely does kind of honor kind of like the established conventions, while at the same time trying to create its own identity as well. This is a bit hypocritical of us, right? Because we do say, at the same time, that we do want to see evolution in movies, especially when it comes to the storyline. However, what I will say is some films don't need that, especially when it comes to, a franchise like this. Stick with what works, and that's exactly what they did. And of course, add your own spin to it, and that's what they did with the whole Bloodlines. But if you've got if you've got a convention that works, an idea, a concept that works, just, build upon it, but still keep it.
Yeah, but for like a decade, movies have not done this, or not often.
True.
It's just interesting that maybe the tide is turning on that, where people are saying this is a very specific brand and we're gonna maintain that brand and we're going to deliver on what it is that the audience actually has signed up for.
Are you referring to the Scream franchise when you say that?
Not specifically Scream, but just everything else.
I'll say you can point to examples like, we kind of watch Ghostbusters, and we talked about how that didn't have some of the same essence. And I feel like, not to say this movie had it easier, but in terms of Final Destination's appeal, like you mentioned, it's about, the weird and wonderful ways that people can die in these type of movies. And it's hard to sort of kind of step away from that type of formula, where in other franchises or other type of movies, it's less so about the things in it, but more so the feeling and like the characters and some of the story that it was trying to tell. It's like with Star Wars, for example, where, you're on this journey with Luke, Leia, Han Solo, etc., and it's about kind of like the core of them and the journey that they go on. but then the wrong lessons are taken from it, and people then sort of kind of like attribute the franchise to just lightsabers or just this or just that, and it's like, no, this isn't what made it special. And every attempt afterwards to try and just kind of like incorporate that type of thing into it fails because you fail to understand what the initial appeal was of the original movie. So I feel like this movie might have had it slightly easier to kind of sort of maybe give it its place for capturing the essence. But also, it's not hard to get the formula wrong in Final Destination, whereas in other movies, it's very clear how you can quite easily take the wrong lessons from what made the first one successful, and then subsequent movies not having the same magic as the first ones had.
It's definitely a fairly straightforward case, but they still had to do it, and they still had to want to do it. And I just found it notable that they did. Like, I'm a casual Final Destination fan. I've watched the other movies and kind of like them, but I'm not like a huge buff on it. Like, I don't know a lot of the details. But if you want a Final Destination movie, this is it, right? Like, this delivers on that. So before we wrap it up, any favorite kills?
Can we quickly go through the kills again? Because I kind of forgot. So there was
the Sky Tree where everyone dies. That was the first one. The second one was the grandma Iris who dies and then opens up the Generation Curse. Third one was the barbecue party that they're having for Iris's death, and then the father dies. And then it's the one with the bin. That one I actually really liked as well, because they explained what was going to happen. And then you think that it's not going to happen, but then that happens to the wrong person in the background whilst they're talking about it. You got that one. You also then have the ones in the hospitals. I think that might be my favorite one, actually. If we're talking about favorites, the MRI one, that one was brutal because it was just like it was so gruesome. And I think he had like the face tattoo on his stomach as well, which made it even more.
It was the piercings.
Yeah, it was a placement, but I think he had like the face tattoo. So when as things were like shooting through him and the blood was like spilling out, it was like kind of like spilling out of the face and whatever. And it was just like great that kill was gruesome.
The amount of people that went to MRI videos on YouTube is crazy. After that scene, me and Daniel went onto it in the office, and then the comment section was just who's here after Final Destination. Not the actual scene, but an actual like MRI example, because we wanted to see if that scene could actually happen in real life, and just say the pool is crazy.
Do you know what? I didn't like the mother's death. I thought it was a bit lame. And I actually didn't like the final deaths as well at the end of the movie as well. I thought they were both kind of. It was more just kind of like rushed, and it wasn't something kind of built up the same way that the other deaths were. Those were the deaths. I think my one's definitely the MRI one. That one was pretty gruesome.
I think it was the MRI as well for me as well.
I will say the one that built up the most dread was the barbecue party one. And that one had me on the edge in terms of some of the glass shard in the cup and where it was and who potentially had it. That whole element had me on the edge of my seat.
I feel like that could have been even more impactful if they didn't add so much of that scene in the trailer, because it was great. I think if I just saw less of that. I didn't watch the trailer.
And you know what? The trailer actually came up. I think I was like searching something. The trailer came up afterwards, and I saw that scene was in there, and I was so glad I didn't watch the trailer.
Lucky. I shouldn't have watched it, because I would have felt like more of what you're feeling if I didn't watch the trailer, because that scene, like just the whole build up, intention and suspension and anxiety in that scene was great.
Of all things, they're playing Jenga at the barbecue.
Yeah.
It's like they're just having fun.
Yeah.
So I think the barbecue had among the best dread. I did like that they were going for the peanut allergy as well, because like that ended up not working, but having a non-violent, non-bloody death in there, or at least the idea, was cool. That was kind of, again, iterating a little bit on the formula, right? It really made this peanut butter cup menacing. Like, I really bought that this guy was afraid of that piece of candy. My personal favorite was the one, first of all, the Sky, I keep forgetting the name, like this scene in the restaurant, that's just the Sky Tree, yeah, it's that one's the most elaborate and the most fun to watch. It's like very carefully setting up all the domino pieces, and then we knock them over after 10 minutes of build up, and it's just one piece of craziness after the next. I did like the garbage compactor scene, like for its simplicity. First of all, like you said, like it gets foreshadowed, and then it doesn't happen, and then it happens in like 2 seconds. It's so absurd and so crazy. All the other kills are, like, typically these kills are fairly normal, like they are massive coincidences, but it's ultimately something very simple that kind of kickstarts it, right? Like in the tattoo parlor, Eric's nose ring gets caught in the chain, right? It's fairly simple, and then it kind of escalates from there. But here we have like this elaborate Rube Goldberg machine kind of thing that ends up with the sister getting crushed in this garbage compactor. So that was nice.
That was nice. Wow. The way we're speaking about death is crazy. Was that our last pause, or should we go to last pause?
I have one more point, which is that not knowing the franchise all that well, I did not pick up on this, or like I picked up on a few of these examples, but the movie's actually full of references to the other movies. If you look up lists of them, it's like this long stuff in the background, or a whole bunch of the kills are references or callbacks to similar scenes in older movies and stuff like that. And it's a very long list. But the movie's not obnoxious about it. If you don't recognize the reference, it's just normal. For example, there's a scene where there's like a truck full of tree logs just driving. It's not the one that ends up killing Stephanie and the brother, but it just drives in the background. And I think in Final Destination 2 or 3, there's like a famous scene like in a lumberyard or something like that, where people get killed by trees.
I still find it difficult to drive behind trucks, whether they have tree logs behind it or not. I still can't do it after all those years.
Yeah, and it's like if you have that movie on your mind, it's a callback and it's a nice little reference, but it's not intrusive. It doesn't stop the movie to say, hey, look at this thing. I like that. Like, and there's a lot of these, like at least 20 of these in the movie. If you notice them, you notice them. If you don't, you don't, but they don't hold up the movie. I thought that was a nice touch.
The one that was not most obvious, but the one where they mentioned Claire Rivers, because obviously that was a character in the previous movie, but it was in a scene where they're trying to remember what the hospital name was, and I feel it was like a nice little nod again without being super intrusive on the movie and being like, oh hey, like, do you remember this? And trying to like shove some member berries down the audience's throat. I will say as well, shout out to Todd. Is it Todd Phillips in the movie? I didn't double check his name.
No,
Tony Todd. Sorry, Tony. Not Todd Phillips. I don't know where I got Todd Phillips from. Shout out to Tony Todd, because I think he passed away before the movie came out, and he had like a really nice little line. I always find a line in the movie about. I can't remember what he said. Just like, you know, I can't remember exactly what he said, but something about, you know, just like living life and enjoying life. You know, enjoying the time that you have.
And he's been in these movies for like 20 years, and he gets to go out on a really good scene where he talks about mortality and letting go as he's dying of cancer, and he knows he has maybe weeks or months left. Now that is method acting.
Yeah. But yeah, and it added like some nice backstory to his character as well, just about, you know, how in the other movies he knew so much and had like so much knowledge. So it was just like, again, just like enriching his character a little bit more. So shout out to Tony Todd.
Which I think is a retcon, right? Like, it was never explained in the older movies. He was just somebody who knew stuff. And here, like, he gets a backstory and it makes sense.
Yeah, because he's the last person that's actually meant to die. After the kids die, he was the next one to pass away. But yeah, I can't remember the previous movies super well to remember like all of his sort of like roles in it. But yeah, probably was a bit of a retcon, and just maybe like a nice way for him to go out.
All right, guys. Well, time for last thoughts.
Really fun cinema experience. Again, not every movie needs to be Shakespeare, and not every movie needs to really have sort of a really deep story and deep characters, etc. Sometimes movie experience can just be fun, and this was fun done in the right way. And it's a movie that knew its premise, knew what it needed to be, and delivered on the experience. I think even over-delivered on that experience. I think it was like such a great time. A slight issue with some of the ending. I thought a little bit weak, a little bit rushed. Some things didn't quite add up, didn't quite make sense. But again, I wasn't there for the story to be perfect and for the story to be wrapped up super perfectly. So I think it was serviceable enough. I thought, you know, it did what it needed to do. It just served a wider, just fun, entertaining movie. So I would definitely recommend. This was a really, really good fun time. And it's always fun when you're in the cinema and things are happening on the screen and people are also reacting in the cinema and they're reacting together. and actually like laughing and stuff like that. It just kind of like adds to the experience of it. And I had that in this, which was really cool. So on that note, I would give this a solid 8 out of 10 for what the movie is meant to be and for what it's trying to do. I'll give it an 8 out of 10. It delivered.
For me, I really did enjoy kind of like the nostalgia feel that I got from this, as well as the new idea that they introduced. I do think that was definitely a good, I wouldn't say progression, but it's just a good additional layer to the franchise, which I really enjoyed. Did feel a bit rushed, however, this film is kind of like a rush in a way. I feel like it does need to be rushed in a way because it can definitely, build on your anxiety and paranoia. So I don't mind it too fully. But overall, I had a very good experience with this one. I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10. I had a really good time with this. It was a fun film. And I want them to release another one.
I just had a really good experience with this. Like it does everything it needs to. It does it competently. There's no real big issues with it. Like there's some little things that could have been a little bit better, or maybe that aren't quite there. But overall, it gives you the experience you signed up for and more. And all the pieces work, and there's no real big standout issues. That's just how you do a franchise movie. That's how you do a sequel. That's how you apply a formula. And so for that reason, that's a 5 out of 7.
All right, guys, thank you very much for tuning in today's discussion, semi-debate.
If you made it this far, thank you very much for rocking with us and supporting the guys. Of course, if you liked everything that you heard today, you should tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought this was a cheap fight, then tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. And we will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.